On June 25, 1876, the Battle of Little Bighorn became a pivotal moment in American history, marked by bravery, tragedy, and survival. Among the few who lived to tell the tale was Sergeant Daniel Kanipe of the 7th Cavalry Regiment. His eyewitness account offers a unique glimpse into the chaos and valor of that fateful day. Join us as we delve into Kanipe's extraordinary story, a narrative of courage amidst overwhelming odds that not only shaped his life, but also the course of history. Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel to support our community. Sergeant Daniel Kanipe served as a soldier in the United States Army, specifically in the 7th Cavalry Regiment, during the Battle of Little Bighorn on June 25, 1876. As a member of Company C, he played a crucial role in the conflict. Kanipe emerged as one of the battle's few survivors, recognized for his bravery and first-hand account of the events. He was also a pivotal witness during the court of inquiry that followed the battle, providing essential testimony regarding the actions of Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer and the 7th Cavalry. Following the battle, Kanipe continued his service in the Army and later documented his experiences at Little Bighorn. His narrative, known as the Kanipe story, is regarded as a significant historical resource for understanding this pivotal battle. The actions of Sergeant Daniel Kanipe during the Battle of Little Bighorn exemplify his bravery and commitment to duty, establishing him as a prominent figure in American military history. Before we proceed, please take a moment to like and subscribe to our channel to support our community. On May 17, 1876, we embarked on what would become a regrettable expedition. We headed toward the Yellowstone River, marching 12 miles to reach the Big Heart River, where we set up camp. We spent some time surveying our surroundings. By around June 10th, we advanced to the Powder River. Out of our 12 companies, 6 were dispatched on a scouting mission. Leaving the wagon train behind at Powder River, we took 10 days' worth of rations on pack mules and traveled up the river for 2 days. We then redirected toward the Tongue River and discovered an Indian trail along the Rosebud River. As dusk approached, we brewed some coffee and marched along the trail throughout the night. The following morning, we prepared more coffee and resumed our march until noon. General Reno, who commanded this detachment, observed that our 10-day rations were dwindling, prompting us to retrace our steps down the Rosebud River. At the confluence of the Rosebud and Yellowstone Rivers, we encountered the other 6 companies of our regiment, led by General Custer. General Terry, who was in charge of the department, was also present. General Custer was under arrest at that time. It was rumored that this was due to his contentious stance against post traders who had previously been granted concessions at various posts, but lost them following scandals related to post riderships during President Grant's administration. These traders had orchestrated a system whereby purchases at the post could only be made through them. The price of a glass of liquor was 25 cents, and the servings were minimal, offering only a small quantity of whiskey. Custer had established a maximum price, which ultimately resulted in his arrest. Despite this, many high-ranking Army officers were present with him, and he was given command at the location previously mentioned. On July 22nd, Custer's unit received a supply of 15 days' rations from the steamboat Far West, which was on the river. Accompanying Custer were 2 Rodman guns and 2 Gatling guns. He believed he could manage without them, so he transferred them to General Gibbon, who took them across the river. In retrospect, this decision appears to have been a mistake. Had he retained one of those Rodman guns and fired it even once, the Indians would likely not have halted their retreat. If we had possessed a Gatling gun at that time, there would have been significantly more survivors than just myself. In fact, it's possible that the Custer massacre may never have occurred. On June 22nd, we broke camp and began our march, continuing throughout the day. That evening, Custer issued orders that there would be no more bugle calls, and only enough fire for coffee, with commands communicated through hand signals. On the morning of June 23rd, we set out once more. We marched until nearly nightfall before establishing camp and resumed our journey the following morning on June 24th. That day, we arrived at a site where the Indians had conducted both a sun dance and a war dance. They had constructed brush shelters from cottonwood trees, and the ground was flattened from their dancing. 6 Crow Indian scouts who were part of our regiment had gone ahead and discovered the scalp of a white soldier from Gibbon's command. When those Indians who harbored animosity toward the Sioux we were pursuing found that scalp hanging from a willow twig, they became extremely agitated. They erupted in excitement, yelling and dancing around. If they had encountered a Sioux there, it would have been disastrous for him. Their anger was palpable. They returned the scalp to General Custer, who examined it before passing it around to the men. Sergeant Finley, the oldest line sergeant in my company, had it stored in his saddle pockets when he was killed. We marched throughout June 24th. The Indian scouts sent ahead returned that night around 10 o'clock. It was quite dark by then. In summer in that region, visibility is often sufficient to read at 9 o'clock. That night we received orders to saddle up and pack our gear. We marched through the night and approached the junction of the Rosebud and Little Bighorn rivers. General Custer led us into a ravine that seemed like an ideal spot for concealment for as long as necessary. However, as we rode in at a brisk trot and gallop, Quartermaster Sergeant Hurst lost some hard bread from the packs of the train. Upon learning of the situation, General Custer instructed the sergeant to return and retrieve the lost bread. When the sergeant arrived at the location where the bread had fallen, he discovered 2 Indians taking advantage of the opportunity. They fled upon spotting the approaching soldiers. After reporting this incident back at camp, General Custer ordered us to prepare our horses. I assumed he intended to surprise the Indians the following morning, but since they were already aware of our presence, he opted to take action immediately. We advanced up the divide and came to a halt. General Custer took with him the chief trumpeter, Henry Voss, along with 2 scouts, and was absent for 2 hours. Upon his return, he divided our regiment into 3 detachments. Major Reno received command of 3 troops A, M, and G, while Captain Benteen was assigned 3 troops H, K, and D. Captain McDougall was tasked with overseeing the pack train alongside Troop B. Custer retained troops C, E, I, and F under his direct command. After leaving that location, we moved out. Major Reno positioned himself to the left of General Custer, with Captain Benteen situated to Reno's left. The strategy was evident. We aimed to strike the Indian camp from 3 different directions. Captain McDougall was responsible for bringing up the pack train along the main Indian trail. We galloped down what is now known as Benteen's Creek and reached a crossing where we discovered an abandoned Indian camp on the opposite side. The fires were still smoldering, and a deceased Indian lay in one of the remaining teepees. General Custer ordered that teepee to be set ablaze. Major Reno appeared in view and was signaled to cross Benteen Creek, which he did. Meanwhile, General Custer advanced down the creek with 3 companies. As we approached within a quarter mile of where Benteen's Creek meets the Little Bighorn River, I noticed Indians atop the bluffs overlooking the river. I pointed them out to First Sergeant Bobo, exclaiming that there were indeed Indians present. At that moment, General Custer raised his head, prompting troops C, I, and F to head toward the bluffs where we had spotted them. Tom Custer, General Custer's brother, served as captain of my Troop C. We rode swiftly, but found that by the time we reached the summit, the Indians had vanished. Nevertheless, we could see teepees scattered for miles around. The Crow Indian scouts accompanying us expressed a desire to sneak down and capture a few ponies. Some attempted to do so, but were shot in their efforts. Chief Scout Mitch Buey, along with Curly a Crow and Bloody Knife. Reeve, who was either a Ree or Urukura, remained on the bluffs with us. When those 4 troops spotted the Indian camp in the valley below, they erupted in cheers and began galloping toward the far end of the bluffs for a chance to swoop down on the camp. I was riding closely behind Sergeant Finkel near Captain Tom Custer when Finkel called out that he could no longer keep pace. As Sergeant Finkel's horse began to falter, I called back, "Come on, Finkel, if you can manage it." He fell behind slightly, and at that moment the captain instructed me to return and locate McDougal along with the pack train to relay some urgent orders from General Custer. "Tell McDougal to bring the pack train directly to higher ground," he said. "If the packs come loose, don't stop to fix them, just cut them off. Move quickly, there's a large Indian camp ahead." I turned back, thinking it was unfortunate timing, but it ultimately turned out to be my saving grace. Had Sergeant Finkel not fallen back moments earlier, he would have received those orders instead of me, and I might not be here recounting this story. In the distance, I noticed dust rising like a small cloud from the pack train. I headed toward it, while my company and the others continued toward the Indian camp. I vividly recall General Custer's last words as we rode at full gallop past him. We cheered for the men on the hill. Some soldiers struggled to maintain control of their horses. As they galloped by General Custer, he shouted, "Boys, hold your horses. There are plenty down there for all of us." They pressed on while I rode back. Upon reaching the pack train, I delivered Custer's orders to Captain McDougal and then proceeded toward Captain Benteen, as instructed. McDougal and his men ascended the hill to support Major Reno as he retreated from the base of the bluffs. The Indians were right behind them, firing and shouting, causing men to fall one after another. The Indians would leap upon them and scalp them before we could intervene. Dr. DeWolf was killed just as he reached the top of the hill. Had he made it just a few feet further, he might have been saved. We succeeded in killing many of the enemy, though I cannot say how many. We found ourselves cut off from water, and there were 68 wounded men in our camp. A wounded man craves water desperately, and it was heartbreaking to hear their groans as they called out for it, but we were unable to provide any. Some men attempted to fetch water, but were shot and unable to return with any for the injured. I vividly recall the very first shot that rang out during that 2-day battle. It zipped right under my horse's belly and struck the ground nearby. 14 men, along with 2 officers, Lieutenant Harrington and Lieutenant Sturgis, were never found. It was rumored that the Indians had decapitated them and dragged their heads around while celebrating during the night. In total, 56 men from our group were killed on the hill by the Indians. The gunfire persisted throughout the day on the 26th. By late evening, we observed the camp beginning to move. The warriors continued to fire at us while the women busily packed up their belongings. When morning arrived on the 27th, there was not a single Indian in sight. We managed to obtain some water, brew coffee, and did our utmost to assist the wounded as best we could. Around 10 o'clock, General Gibbon and his troops arrived. General Terry, the department commander, accompanied him. When General Terry appeared, we greeted him with loud cheers. He was visibly emotional and cried openly. He informed us that he had seen 200 men in the valley below, which made us realize that General Custer and his 4 companies had been utterly annihilated. We had hoped that perhaps he had merely been trapped like us. Later that afternoon, on the 27th, Captain Benteen went to the battlefield, and I was permitted to accompany him and explore wherever I wished. As I surveyed the bodies, I recognized several friends and a sergeant I knew well. I spotted Sergeants Finkel and Finley among the dead. Sergeant Finley lay at the head of his horse, Carlo, with 12 arrows protruding from him. They had been left there for 2 days under the sun, bloodied and mutilated. It was evident which men had been wounded because the Indians and women would shoot them full of arrows or strike them in the face with tomahawks after stripping them of their clothes. They never harmed those who were already dead. Only those who still drew breath suffered. Among all these bodies, not a single one remained clothed. The Indians had taken everything. They must have seized around $25,000 in cash from us. This was particularly significant since we had just been paid at Powder River Camp before departing on this campaign, and there had been nothing available to spend our money on. I saw where the last men fell. They lay in a small heap. General Custer was positioned across a couple of men with only a small portion of his back touching. The dead were numerous around him. He had been shot directly through the heart. My captain, Tom Custer, General Custer's brother, was near this final group, along with his brother-in-law, Lieutenant Calhoun, who commanded H Troop. In that battle, approximately 4,000 Indians participated, excluding women and children, bringing the total number of Native Americans involved to between 12,000 and 15,000. This was an overwhelming force that Custer and his men faced. After the defeat of Custer and his 4 companies, no one remained alive on the battlefield to recount the events. Only one horse survived the massacre, Comanche, belonging to Captain Keogh. When found later, Comanche had sustained 7 bullet wounds. Numerous dead Indians were also discovered among the fallen soldiers. We came across 3 standing teepees containing about 75 Indians, and it's uncertain how many more bodies were removed when the Native American camp departed. I encountered one Indian wrapped in blankets and buffalo robes. Upon cutting him free, I was horrified to find a string of scalps as long as my arm, including 4 women's scalps, 2 of which had long red hair. It was a gruesome sight that I quickly discarded. I had no desire to carry such a disturbing trophy. After the battle concluded, our fallen comrades were buried, and we began the arduous task of transporting the wounded to the Far West steamboat. The steamboat had traveled as far up the river as possible, but then had to retreat back down to the Yellowstone River. Many of the injured soldiers were loaded onto the steamboat for medical care. Miraculously, most of the wounded men recovered from their injuries. Old Comanche, the sole survivor from Custer's ill-fated battle, was among them. An order from General Headquarters ensured that this horse would have a box stall for life as a tribute to that fateful day. One soldier from the 7th Cavalry Band was assigned to care for Comanche, and during dress parades, the horse would lead at the front of the regiment, draped in a black mourning cloth. As for the Indians, they simply packed up their camp and moved on after the battle. My regiment, which had also fought in the conflict, was too badly injured to pursue them. We were all too wounded and shot up to mount any effective counteroffensive. The Indians achieved a decisive victory and managed to escape without further bloodshed. I hope this first-hand account provides you with a new perspective on the Battle of Little Bighorn and the Great Sioux War of 1876. Stay tuned for more videos like this one. I aim to bring you additional first-hand accounts from various battles.